DLTs, blockchain are subversive. They have the potential to completely reimagine incentive systems, how wealth and power are instantiated and then distributed, and how they're exercised in concert, right? Disintermediation, decentralization. I've never met you. Blockchain can help in new and interesting ways with that indelible digital ledger to foster trust and cooperation between us.
So where are you from originally? I don't even know.
I was born and I grew up in Coconut Grove, Florida, which is just south of Miami. My mom had won a beauty pageant in Cincinnati, Ohio, and she's not too embarrassed about this anymore. She won this beauty pageant, and one of the things they gave her was a convertible car.
Oh, nice.
So I think she was 17, something like that. They gave her a convertible car. So she goes up with all her friends. She hasn't said this, but I'm guessing they maybe had a few beers or something like that, and she crashed it. And it was like, long story short, it was kind of a crisis for her. She decided to run away from home. So she was going to Haiti. She had an intention of just showing up at the Peace Corps offices there. But when she got to Miami, they had canceled all flights. I guess Papa Doc Duvalier had come into power or something like that. And so she ended up in the apartment next to my dad. And so they met, and we lived in that little place. And then eventually they bought the church and the whole property across the street and opened a shop in the middle of Coconut Grove. And the church was called the Temple of Yoga. And it brought all these like religious and spiritual teachers, mostly from Asia.
Were they Buddhists or?
No, none of those people were Buddhists. The main guru that I remember that came through was a guy named Baba Haridas, Babaji for short, and he just died like 2 or 3 weeks ago in his 90s. He had taken a vow of silence for 50 years, so I had never heard him speak. He wrote on a chalkboard. And oh my gosh. The little hippie commune where I was born, my parents eventually split when I was 7. Most of that community migrated up to Santa Cruz from Miami. And that was the beginning of something called Mount Madonna Center, which is now a huge, thriving community at the top of the mountains there. And
that was started by your parents?
It was Babaji.
The roots.
Yeah, Babaji was the anchor, and now he's gone. And so, but it's a K through 12 school with an amazing volleyball team. There's a huge Hanuman temple up there that's attracting Hindus from hundreds of miles around. It's I think a very interesting place, and it's kind of a retreat center. So it's a little bit like Esalen or 1440. So you can go there for retreats and all kinds of other stuff.
Did you grow up around that?
I did. So I think this is just reflection and rationalization. I think when I walk up to a stranger, I assume they're my friend and they'll play with me, and even sometimes, offer them a hug, because that's what it was like when I was a kid. If I ran into anyone on the property, I was like, "You want to play?" And they would usually say yes. So I grew up. It was very much like a village vibe.
That's probably where you get your altruistic tendencies. Now that you say this, because we've talked about this and and how this is a big motivation for you. So that actually, I feel like that makes sense to me.
Yeah. Well, I think for most people, I don't think it's just me. My experience is most people, even if they temporarily get misguided, I think one of the most fulfilling things for people is acting out of altruism, and they often feel pulled away from that by material necessities providing for themselves or their families. So I've always been interested in what are ways that we can get people back into integrity, so that they get to operate from those deeper values. That first of all, maybe need to learn how to articulate those values in ways that really resonate for them, and then how do we create incentive systems that allow them to kind of rest there most of the time.
Yeah, and this is what we'll talk about, because we're going to talk about blockchain, distributed ledger technologies, and economics, but where your unique perspective comes from is from this underlying altruistic foundation, if you will.
I want, well, should we go back and should we talk more about how I ended up here, or should we dive into this topic? What do you think's better? Well,
let's finish up your background, sure, and then we can jump into this value of yours, because it sounds like it kind of fuels everything else that you do.
It does, absolutely. Yeah, so so after my parents separated, I lived there in Miami. I eventually I started college late. I moved out to Portland, Oregon, and I was there. Moved there I think when I was 18 or 19. I lived there for a little while, and it became clear I wanted to go to a liberal arts college. So I started my freshman year. I started at the age 20 at Bard College in the Northeast, north of New York City. And while I was there, I tried to study everything. In 4 years, I think I ended up with 5.5 years of credits.
Wow. Our term of the day is dilettante.
Dilettante, yeah.
Dilettante that I just learned, which means?
Just somebody who, a generalist, somebody, a jack of all trades, master of none, somebody who's so interested in everything that and not particularly enthusiastic about developing deep expertise. And that's definitely how I was in college. The 3 summers in between my 4 years, I studied in Germany, China, and France. And I would have taken Russian if I could have kept doing undergrad.
Well, you could have.
Graduation to me felt like they're kicking me out.
Yeah.
Like, this is so great. And so I didn't know what to do. I think at that point, Bard College was per capita graduating more professors, like people who go on to grad school and become professors, than like any college in the country. So everyone I knew was going to grad school. So I was like, I don't want a real job. I'll go to grad school. So I ended up getting I got into Columbia under Bob Thurman. But I got a full ride under Jeffrey Hopkins at the University of Virginia. So I went there for a PhD in Buddhist studies and religious studies, if I had finished that, I would have become a scholar I would have had to teach academically all the world's major religions, but I would have had deeper expertise in Buddhism.
Why didn't you?
I got there and I looked at, I don't want to name names. There were certain people there who were following that trajectory, and they just seemed like they were grinding it out. And I looked at all the career outcomes, and I had friends who were further along than me, top of your class at Yale, and they're like, it's like 100 interviews to get that one adjunct position for 20 grand or 30 grand a year in Oklahoma.
Wow.
It was very, very competitive. We put out a lot of PhDs, and when you're doing something that's essentially purely academic, the career options are super limited. So anyway, I dropped out. I went to New York City. I got a job in the art world. I worked there. I worked in Paris. And then in 2002, with a business partner, we opened an international art gallery in San Francisco. And I did that for 10 years.
What did you do in the arts?
So we had a private art gallery where we did exhibitions. We had 2 kind of parallel programs. We did sort of a strategic assessment and realized we speak a lot of languages and we've spent a lot of time overseas. So we can find major artists like of this level in India, and an artist of the same stature in the US won't even return our calls. But she will. And she's never had a commercial show in the States. So it's a lot more hassle, a lot more expense, but we'll give her first commercial show in the States.
Oh, wow.
And so we did a lot of that. So, our roster there was like 50-50 Americans, mostly California, and then abroad, from all these other countries. And then we had a second program, which was historical, which was women artists associated with surrealism. So the one that everyone knows is Frida Kahlo. We did have a few pieces by Kahlo over the years, but the main ones we showed were like Leonora Carrington, Remedios Varo, Wolfgang Paulin. When World War II hit Europe and there was an exodus of artists, the majority, the ones that probably are most familiar to people, like Yves Tanguy or Magritte, often ended up in New York City, but a smaller contingent ended up in Mexico City. And the Surrealists loved Mexico. I mean, Andre Breton called it the Surrealist country par excellence. And so we realized that those artists their market value was much lower and their recognition was much lower. So we decided to focus on them and their estates, and we worked with their kids and stuff like that.
Great. And then how did you come out of that?
I came out of that in 2012. My business partner and I broke up, and I had a conversation with a good friend, and he was like, I was like worried about making a living. I didn't want another gallery. I knew that for sure. I had been on the board at YBCA, Urbana Center for the Arts, for 5 years. We had started a nonprofit called Epicenter Arts. And the most lucrative jobs kind of in the commercial art world either you're the 1% of galleries that make a fortune, or they're in the auction world. And it was tempting. And this friend of mine, who's a very successful business guy, said, if you take an auction job, you're going to be in this industry for the rest of your life. And I don't think you're happy here. And I'm really glad he said that, because it was mostly fear driving me deeper into the industry. And so I took a leap. I had a ton of friends that I had been really curious about in technology. And so I started working in the sort of technology ecosystem, very quickly figured out my happy place is startups. Giant companies have like an immune system, like their antibodies they get really curious about me, and then they're like, no.
Why? Well, you're not a tech guy.
Initially I was selling myself as the marketing, branding, sales guy. But, I was really starting to pay attention to what lit me up. And bureaucracy kind of shuts me down. And so, but these little consulting gigs, it was a constant hustle. But I was learning about so many interesting things so quickly. And I loved the hubris of it, the thought that this tiny little inflection point could really transform things. And so, at this point, I've probably been an advisor or a consultant or a founding team member of, 40, 50 different things.
Startups?
Yeah, I'm just constantly involved in a lot of different stuff. And, it's had its ups and downs, and
it's a tumultuous. The entire nature of startups is
faster and faster,
right.
Boom and bust.
All over the place, messy.
Right. It's like you run to someone 6 months later, they're like, aren't you doing the alligator farm? Like, oh no, that ended. Two months ago, we were going to deliver alligators door to door. It just didn't play out.
The drones.
The drones with the baby alligators.
They didn't work out.
We're going to protect your yard. I have heard more ridiculous. I don't say yes to everything. So where did that go? So that
I was gonna say. So where have you found the sweet spot in this exploration for what motivates you? You've been in a lot of different industries. It sounds like. How did you find where you're at now?
Sweet spot. I like that. That's a good way to phrase it.
Are you stuck on the baby alligators?
No, we're biologically predisposed to look for pattern, right? We're pattern recognition machines, really. That's one of the most foundational elements of survival. And we're so good at it, and we're so predisposed to pattern recognition that we will often see patterns when they're not even there. So I got really interested in that, and I was having all these fast little engagements, and I was looking for the pattern in where I was contributing the most and getting that feedback, and where I was learning the most and finding it the most fulfilling. And I would describe my sweet spot now as business altruists. They're people, to use a metaphor, they're people who see wealth as fuel, but it is absurd to be worshipful of the person who has 100 tankers of fuel and no beautiful rocket ship, right? And that's how I think of us culturally. We classic Calvinist Protestant stuff. If you're rich, it's proof that you're in favor with God, and if you're poor, you're out of favor with God. If you get into favor with God, God will make you rich. And that undercurrent in American culture is still very much there, even if you don't identify with any of those religions. So I think of people that I most admire, maybe they're able to generate some wealth, but it's always in service of an altruistic vehicle that they're going to fuel with it. And so those are the people where there's just deep and instant respect and admiration and a desire to collaborate. And if you feel that is reciprocal, which it isn't always, that is your biggest signal that this is a true business opportunity. I wish some mentor had said to me in my 20s. So when I was getting into my first business, what everyone said, who was older than me and who I admired, was, you have these skills and she has these skills. And look at the complementarity. It's very logical. It's very linear. And it's not that that isn't valid, but experience has taught me that's not what's most important. If you have redundancy of domain expertise, but you leap out of bed for the same reasons in the morning, you're going to find the long haul, especially the tough parts, way easier, like way more fulfilling. And so that's the alignment that I look for now.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I know you push a lot for what you call altruistic economies.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, different, I like to imagine different incentive systems that would align profit motive with intrinsic motives.
And you think that distributed ledger technologies like blockchain can help that?
Yeah. So that's why I got excited about this industry. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I definitely want to talk to you about that, because that is a unique perspective on this technological boom.
Yeah.
I think first it would probably be helpful for our viewers for us to talk a little bit about blockchain and distributed ledger technologies in relation to economics.
Sure.
We've had on a few guests already to talk about blockchain and the actual how it technically works.
Yeah.
So we won't really do that necessarily. I encourage our viewers to go look at those if they want to know more about that. But I want to talk to you about economics, because the word on the street is that this could change life as we know it.
Yeah.
So you, in a few of your articles, you break down this whole concept into potential promises of using blockchain, distributed ledger technologies, and potential harm. So I'd love for us to break those down.
Sure.
So to start with the potential, I mean, our economic system right now is pretty much run by centralized institutions.
That's right.
Why is that a bad thing?
So, good question. I think what you need to do is you need to step back and realize that there is no perfect economic system that will best serve human needs or the biosphere on planet Earth forever, right? We're not going to one day, it's like a marriage. Like you don't one day just have the best day ever with your spouse and you're like, I'm done. I can just kick back and sit on my laurels, right? If you understand a committed partnership, it's dynamic. And you have to pay attention, and you have to be caring, and you have to apologize, and you have to adapt. So capitalism as we know it, the shareholder economy, which is this giant juggernaut, has lifted vast numbers of people out of poverty. So it has done many good things. When I look around the world, I read David Graeber's book not too long ago called Debt, D-E-B-T, the first 5,000 years. And in it, it's a polemic, it's an argument, but in it he also kind of in some ways catalogs all these different amazing forms of commerce and debt and credit that have existed in different civilizations at different places and times. And so what you start to realize is there was this diversity of economic systems, and they were adaptive to that context. And now what we have is the equivalent of monoculture. It's as though the entire world was sown with one kind of corn. And if I described to you an eggplant, it would be unimaginable, right? When I talk to people, especially people who are very savvy business people, it's amazing the imagination constraints, because they feel like capitalism as we know it now is the one and only true system. And it's baked into the fabric of the universe, and you just got to adapt to it. So there's three things that I think capitalism is suicide. I think it's civilizational suicide, right? Jared Diamond writes about in Collapse. One is wealth polarization. At the incentive layer, at the very wellspring, if you imagine a mountain, and here's this giant river flowing from the top of the mountain, and that river is sort of calibrated to polarize wealth. What we do is we alter its course in all these ways using things like progressive taxation, rule of law, regulation to try to bolster a middle class. But the system itself naturally produces a tiny amount of winners and a huge amount of marginalized people. So we're trying to fix it after the fact. Like, I just got back from OC Impact, Opportunity Collaboration in Mexico. And all of those wonderful, caring, compassionate, deeply thoughtful, and often brilliant people, when I look, I see them swimming upstream in the river of capitalism, right? Because you only have two choices: drink and be part of it, or die of thirst, right? If you refuse to participate, you can't even see to your basic needs. So wealth polarization, hyperconsumption. The tail is officially wagging the dog when it comes to macroeconomics. What that means is you and I come up with a foolproof plan to make 1 million sweaters, right? And we are not responding to, oh, that guy over there is cold, let's make him a sweater, right? We're going to make 1 million sweaters, and then we're going to make him feel inadequate if he's not wearing one. That's the low-hanging fruit of marketing. That's what marketers often cannot resist doing, you know. And if you want to see a more altruistic form of marketing, you can check out Seth Godin, right, who does opt-in marketing. Seth's philosophy would be more like, you're perfect and totally lovable exactly as you are. There's nothing wrong with you. I'm really excited about this sweater. Would you like to try one? And that's just harder. It's harder to do. And then the third thing I think that is really really not sustainable is the tragedy of the commons. And this is that capitalism is designed to be maximally extractive. And again, we slap regulation on top of that, environmental regulation, other things. But really, if like the four of us lived in near a rainforest, capitalism would suggest that the first one of us to cut it all down and profit wins. And the other three people are just shit out of luck. So those are three things that I think are unsustainable. And I think you can acknowledge all the good that's come out of entrepreneurship and still acknowledge that those three trends, if they go on forever, will, won't work. The reason I got excited about distributed ledger tech, and I have to give credit here to Matt McGraw. So he was a friend. Matt and his wife Elle had a space in San Francisco, and he was essentially, as he said, it retired. He'd had a few tech exits. And they were they loved my dinners. They loved the good people dinners. So they started hosting the dinners and coming to a lot of the dinners and coming to the retreats and stuff like that. And maybe 14 months ago or a little more, he came and said, you know that I have like a whole palette of exercises I facilitate with startups. He said, you know that thing you do with the branding and da-da-da? Could you do that for us? So like, okay. So I joined, and then I got offered a job, and then I got offered partner at this benefit corporation called the Bureau. And the reason I got more and more and more excited about it is it's subversive. DLTs, blockchain, are subversive. They have the potential to completely reimagine incentive systems, how wealth and power are instantiated and then distributed, and how they're exercised in concert, right? Disintermediation, decentralization. I've never met you. Blockchain can help in new and interesting ways with that indelible digital ledger to foster trust and cooperation between us.
And so what does the current system right now look like with centralized institutions? With
centralized institutions. I'm really tempted to steal from our friend Marta, who was on this show recently.
Do it. She won't mind.
Okay, I credited you, Marta. But, the reason I like that she did this is it's the simplest and most obvious one, right? So if I have $5, right, and I say I want to give you $5, right now the way it works with our digital money, because we're already using digital money, I say to my bank, I would like to give Michelle $5. Okay, they debit my account. They go to your bank. Please credit her account $5, right? And then your bank says, you just got $5 from Raman. Given the state of technology, even in centralized databases, and them taking a fee as middlemen and trust brokers, I don't think that makes a lot of sense anymore. Like, we should be able to transact directly. So there are central authorities that act as trust brokers in almost every aspect of our lives. Your patient data right now, and we can talk about self-sovereign identity, is essentially on some company's database, and they're constrained by HIPAA, but it's theirs, right? It's not
because
yours.
they own the servers. They approve the transactions.
That's right.
The transactions have to go through them to get to someone else.
And it'd be a hassle if you switch providers and you try to get it.
Right.
They're actually economically incentivized to kind of try to make it a hassle to switch.
Oh, they do.
Right?
Yeah.
It's the same with phone companies, right? Until there's legislation that allowed you to keep your phone number when you switch phone companies, they were like, no, we're not going to let you do that. So
we don't really... No, ownership's not it's just a time suck. Costs money.
Time suck, costs money. It has a target painted on it for hackers, and those data breaches happen pretty much every day now, and in large
you hear
centralized
them all the time.
And so this is a major dysfunction in distributed ledger technology. There are concepts like sharding, but essentially it becomes hard to impossible to do the kind of hacks that you routinely experience at. Facebook recently lost a bunch of personal data, for instance.
Right.
And they had to fess up to it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the potential, or I'm sorry, the as you were saying, potential promise, like why distributed ledger technology is good. So how can, say, blockchain change these current systems?
So I think there needs to be a mea culpa on behalf of the industry first, in the sense that in this moment, there are no blockchains that I'm aware of in operation that absolutely bury in performance centralized databases like Amazon Web Services. So that's one thing. So we're talking about promise. We're not talking about something that has already been fully delivered.
Sure, potential.
Two, in that piece that I wrote, The Hypercapitalism or a World Without Need, I talk about this bifurcating possibility for the use. It's a tool. It's empty. It's like the parable of the hammer.
Because blockchain is just a concept.
It's an idea of how
product.
information is distributed, accessed, shared. But it is also true that, most macroeconomic analysis says the most valuable commodity on earth is data now. It's not even energy, it's data. So with, the hammer, you can smash things, you can build things. And so with distributed ledger technologies, you had an interesting inflection point. And I use the analogy of the ARPANET, right? The very, very, very beginning of the internet. Essentially, a bunch of nerds were like, hey, we can send mail instantly electronically anywhere on Earth. Amazing. And Wall Street and profiteers looked at that and they said, can't make money there. And they basically left them alone. And those people had enough time to build a pretty altruistic system. And the most common expression of that is net neutrality. And so this was a vision that they saw of, Moore's law, increased computational power, diminishing cost of computers. Eventually, every human being has a computer. And through it, in a totally egalitarian way, no manufactured scarcity, you could access all of human knowledge. And that is beautiful, right? And the Electronic Frontier Foundation and other organizations fought to maintain it, and it died. It took about 30, 40 years, the invention of the attention economy, right? The money that you earned from your eyeball minute, and it eventually was eroded. So I think of distributed ledger tech as this power. Go ahead.
I want to ask you about that. How did that concept end?
Net neutrality, essentially through legislation, was abolished.
Oh, you're talking about specifically net. Oh, so that's what you mean when you wrote about how the original concept of the internet is not.
Right. So net neutrality. So now, for instance, it's legal for internet service providers to give 2 speeds. Right. I was just there in Mexico. Man, the internet was slow, but I could pay for faster. Right. And so now you've got hierarchy, you've got manufactured scarcity.
What people were worried was going to happen, that's actually started happening.
That is now more the rule than the exception globally for how we access information. So if you're poor, your ability to access all of human knowledge is weaker or inferior to if you're rich, right? And that's what they were trying to make sure didn't happen. So that was mail. This time, it was the altruistic promise is any 2 people or entities can safely and securely transact online with anyone else in the world if you build the right infrastructure. Unfortunately, the very first blockchain with proof of work and Bitcoin and Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper proved that we could instantiate, we could solve for double spend. We could instantiate a pool of currency with a finite limit to how much is going to be in circulation. And we don't need a central bank. We don't need a bank at all. We can just do it with software. And the problem with that is this time it wasn't mail. This time it was money. And so the Fortune 100 was like, we would like to invent money. And so everyone piled in. And so what I've experienced over the last year is a frenzy of greed, frankly, and speculation and hype, and in some cases even fraud, and no certainty around a regulatory framework. But the people who were trying to operate legitimately, like we were like begging for regulatory clarity, because we want to play by the rules, and we know that having regulatory clarity and rules to the road would cause a lot of institutional money to come into the space. And that's today, that still hasn't happened. And I think America's missing the boat on that. There are other much smaller municipalities. This is all digital technology, so people can move anywhere on Earth relatively easily. And so other smaller municipalities are giving those clear and pretty indulgent regulatory frameworks. And so a lot of companies associated with this are relocating there.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, I mean, let's talk more about this and the benefits of this. Mm-hmm. So this, from the sounds of that, brings the power back to the people. It sounds like takes it out of it. Could this is all speculative. Speculative, all potential. Mm-hmm. But the reason why the concept is growing so much is because it could potentially take the power away from or control. Yeah, central authorities, banks, other institutions, brokers.
It can give leverage. Mm-hmm. You can end up with leverage, or you can end up simply cutting these giant organizations out of the picture. Mm-hmm. So there's understandably some resistance there, I think, or the desire to use all these technological tools and this vocabulary, but to do it in proprietary ways. So a lot of projects like I know Hyperledger's been hired to do a number of projects where the blockchain projects are essentially opaque, or they're proprietary rather than open source and fully visible. And for me, that is, it'll work, and there's value there. There's reason companies are hiring different other companies to do that, but it kind of defeats that altruistic potential that I keep trying to go back to, mm-hmm. right? Which is to essentially, it's to raise the floor on need, right? I think we already have enough resources in the world that it is imaginable that if, and it's going to require sacrifice, if people at the top had less and people at the bottom had more, you can move a lot of people out of that scarcity place and into a more abundant future where they would have their, the possibilities for them manifesting their potential grow exponentially, right? That's the world I want to live in. I would be disgusted, and I think it's certainly possible, that on the next boom, people are calling it the crypto winter. On the next boom, we might see an overnight individual who becomes a trillionaire. And I think that's sad. I think that's kind of a societal illness, right? Would I rather see one trillionaire or 2 billion people instantly mm-hmm. lifted out of poverty because you're delivering cryptocurrency to their smartphone?
Right. So let's talk about how this can do that, how this gives power. Well, I guess, why would the everyday person want to adopt a distributed ledger technology way of living? So it gives power back to us, if you will, and
potentially,
potentially. Why does it do that?
So to answer your question, it's helpful probably to use some concrete examples. So as I mentioned, I was just at OC Impact, where I met my brother from another mother. I hope we'll end up doing amazing projects together. His name's Philip Silva. We had talked on the phone before we went there, and we really clicked because we're driven by the same values, and we both have some network and expertise in this area now. And he's working on a project called Bright ID. And we can talk about what self-sovereign identity means. It really means like there's only one of you in the physical world, right? You can't, and now there are 100 bodies walking around that are all you. You can do that digitally. It's not even that hard. And so people do because it delivers certain advantages. If you could create a digital analog to that, where there's only one of you in the entire world, and that's pretty incontrovertibly provable, all kinds of new possibilities open up, right? If you had, so most of these self-sovereign identity plays are essentially that. It's about you creating one digital identity that you own and control online. Mm-hmm. And that plugs in and can operate in anyone's product or service online. But you're in charge. Now, if you combine that, now you control your data, and you have a platform cooperative of 1 million other people who share your values. You have collective bargaining. You have what unions used to deliver. Those 1 million people can then go to that pharma company and say, we would love to share all 1 million members' patient data with you, and it'll cost you this much. And there are constraints on how you access that, or if the data is anonymized, or you can put whatever constraints you want. You can put it into a smart contract. It can expire a year later, and you can renegotiate whatever you want to do. So that's hugely promising, and that could put passive income into the pockets of everyday people. Because right now, if you're generating $10 a minute on Facebook, I'm making that number up, $10 per minute goes to Facebook. And in that kind of world, if you're generating $10 per minute and you collectively bargain, a percentage of that could go back into your pocket, right? And so I mean, so basically, these self-sovereign identity platforms are usually, most of the ones I know of in development are domain specific. Philip's thing is really cool because there's zero profit motive. It's a nonprofit or an org, and he's trying to create this base layer of a general purpose self-sovereign identity based on your social graph.
And the reason why this is possible is because you're saying that people could essentially, have full ownership of who they are, whatever that is, their deeds, their money, their whatever it is, and they have control over it because of this secure
encrypted
system,
sharded, distributed,
and that's why it's so revolutionary.
Yes, yeah, because that doesn't exist. Basically, what exists in the real world. So right now, you can't be coerced or exploited in a wide range of ways in your physical body. And you can online, right? Mm-hmm. You don't have a choice, right?
So because of this, I wouldn't need to have 1 million different accounts out there for this company, that company, this
you could
doctor,
still,
that.
It would be like an API. You would plug your self-sovereign identity, say, now my one and only true self is surfing on Facebook.
But if they go down, my information doesn't go down with it.
Yes, you still retain that. That's correct. Yeah, and so there are a lot of attempts to do this kind of stuff, but it's really about giving power and control of your digital assets and your eyeball minutes back to individuals. And there are some incredibly humanitarian applications of this across a wide range of topics. Unfortunately, most people aren't building there because it's not get rich quick. Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah. Do you mind talking a little bit about like actual protocols and tokens, which is essentially what allows this to be a possibility, right? If people decided to take advantage of that and build whatever it was they wanted to build on top of the blockchain,
right?
They could build whatever they wanted.
Yeah. So a combination of having a distributed, indelible, and cryptographically secured digital ledger, right? And your ability to build a currency on top of that with supply and demand models that keep it relatively stable. This has been an issue, is instability, volatility of the value of these things. If you could put all that together, you have the possibility that originally got me super jazzed about all this. You have the possibility to diagram a new incentive system and to think about how you might deploy a microeconomy in a particular context using essentially cell phones. What would that look like? One of the intellectuals that I most admire right now is a woman named Kate Raworth. I hope Kate will watch at least a portion of this. She teaches at Oxford, and she wrote a book called Donut Economics, and I really recommend her TED Talk. And donut economics is really about an economic modeling of essentially temperance, right? Modesty in consumption. If you overshoot, you have the tragedy of the commons, right? You just absolutely run down all of the natural resources. If you have a shortfall, you have poverty. And the goal is to keep all human beings within this band where they can thrive and the planet can thrive. I think right now a lot of this is magnificent theory. I believe blockchain and cryptocurrency is a tool to make it real, potentially. And the best way to do that is trial and error. So I'm talking to a number of friends who I'd like to partner with, game theorists and developers, and I'd love to have someone working at this. It'll be a foundation, I think, who worked at a central bank, and to come up with these incentive systems and to deploy them in tiny ways and learn, deploy, iterate, learn, deploy, iterate, and learn in cooperation, probably with like NGOs who have deep understanding of the communities where we would be deploying them. So taking a human-centered design approach to how we create the incentive system and then deploy it as software. So what would that look like?
Yeah.
PG&E did this before cryptocurrency or blockchain. PG&E 30, 40 years ago, if we left every light in this house on and the fridge open and just everything, right, and you had a $500 to $1,000 electric bill, they were pumped. That's standard capitalism. But they realized, like, we're going to have brownouts, we're going to have failed grids. This doesn't work. So how do we encourage moderation in consumption of electricity? And they got together with the state legislature and they came up with a system where they and their customers are incentivized to be modest in their consumption of electricity. And so now when I'm marketed by them, they're like, good for you, you used less of our product. And this is how you measure up against your neighbors. And I thought, well, this is brilliant. Like, this is a model that can be facilitated by blockchain and cryptocurrency for every good and service we can think of. You could create indelible ledgers that allow us to see and track and incentivize modest consumption.
So where does the incentive come from? If this is the case, if they say they want to program some kind of thing that incentivizes their customers to use less, how does that help them as a company?
So I've been meaning for a while to dig into the guts of how this all actually happened, and I just haven't gotten around to it. I've been too busy. But there are, just like you can short stocks and all kinds of other things, there are ways to disincentivize infinite growth economically.
Yeah, you've mentioned, you asked a question, is infinite growth and infinite creation of jobs a good thing? What do you mean by that?
Yeah. You know, infinite growth on a planet of finite resources ends with a bunch of absurdities. One person owns everything. You know, we spend all our time, every waking minute, essentially shopping and buying, right? So it's not remotely sustainable or desirable. And in my experience, it's also, when everything becomes a transaction, right, you end up with social isolation, right? So I have another business that I've run for 6 years now. We've done about 200 events, all different venues, and they're mostly dinners and overnights and retreats. And we have an amazing speaker and a chef and a wine sponsor, and we come together to have a substantive conversation. And at the beginning, I try to set some expectations and ground rules. And one of them is, I ask people, you know, think right now of that one thing you're pursuing. Right? Think of that, the American adage, like, if you don't ask for it, you're not going to get it. Right? And we are the culture that's so good at maniacally pursuing our objectives. I'm like, think of that one thing. It could be a romantic partner, an investor, you want to hire someone. Really? Okay, you got that in your mind? Tonight, here, don't ask for that. Don't go after it. And when I say that and I look at how it registers emotionally in the room, everyone's like, oh, thank God. Right? I get to turn it off for a minute. We self-isolate for a number of different reasons in our culture, but a big one is, if I go out, I have to pursue my thing, and I'm going to get other people pursuing their thing. There's going to be asks, and it's tiring. So,
So, well, I was wondering what you meant by, because you said, is exponential growth or unlimited growth a good thing? And I'm wondering economically, how does that work to pull things back, kind of back to the business owner that is incentivizing his customers to use less energy? How does that help him keep his business afloat?
We all get to live on a planet that's not going to implode and become inhospitable to human life. I read an article recently that, that's a macro thing to say, but I read an article recently about how there was this one point in the geologic record where there were like swamps at the North and South Poles. Like the North and South Poles of planet Earth were tropical. And they were surmising from that record, that geologic record, that the equator, the band of equator, was essentially completely lifeless and uninhabitable. And so, is that long-term sustainable if we don't check climate change? Probably not. From the micro level, what does that look like? I can only answer that in the sense that, I should own that I don't have depth of expertise in most of these things, but I can see so clearly that dream team that does. And so we would discuss and debate ways to incentivize this modest consumption from the small business owner all the way up to the biggest world organizations in support of remediating those three things I said were unsustainable, like the wealth polarization, the rest of it. So, but I can give a concrete example that helped me to clarify a bunch of this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm kind of a community junkie. I go to a lot of communities. Some recurrently, some only once. And I was at Summit in Eden, Utah, and I ended up in this where when you drop into a conversation and it's like 3 or 4 hours go by.
Yeah,
it was like that with this woman Barbara Mertz and Stephanie Ware, and they were from the Nature Conservancy. And so we were talking about they're eager to try little innovative experiments, and we were talking about a little fishing village in Mexico, where that economy was dependent on the nearby fishery. And so if they want to maintain that economy in perpetuity for their own welfare, this fishery needs to be healthy. But there's always that temptation to overfish to the point where it might collapse. So how would that look if we were to experiment there? And we kind of workshopped through it. So they have people on the ground there who've been there for a while who could at least initially represent the community, and then before we deploy, we could actually go and talk, a human-centered design approach to the community before we experiment with this. And we could say, hey, we're going to give you a little bit of free money in cryptocurrency on your phones based on the health of this fishery. The healthier the fishery, the more you earn by protecting it. So we create an economic incentive there to keep this sustainable. And it's a little bit gamified. There are autonomous systems that can monitor the health of that fishery, the quantity and variety of fish. And so at any time, if they were to pull it up, they could see how the fishery was doing. And so there's a peer pressure works great. There's a peer-to-peer incentive to be like, hey, we're all in this together and we all benefit if it stays healthy. Doesn't mean we stop fishing. It just means let's make sure it stays healthy. And then the cryptocurrency starts to accumulate within the geographical bounds of that community. And we start to then create use cases for that currency. So they've started to accumulate it, and it's like traditional channel partnerships. We ask the local people, what do you buy most? And they say, oh, we buy XYZ. Great. Well, you can get a 10% discount using that cryptocurrency we've been giving you to buy cooking oil or whatever it is. And so you instantiate this little economy and you start to grow that economy. And it's digital, it's disintermediated, it's decentralized. Notice in all of this, I have no idea how we make money. I just want these things to work, which is why I'm thinking of a foundation.
Well, because that's what I'm wondering is the incentive. What is the incentive for people to do? Because it sounds great. I mean, if there's a way for people to make money and also do good, why not? And actually, I feel like we're already seeing a shift in that as it's kind of apart from blockchain. I feel like there's been a big shift towards
impact investment funds,
right?
And all that.
Do good. Is it the do good economy? Is that how they the unofficial term for it?
Yeah, just like altruistic capitalists.
Yeah, fair trade,
conscious capitalism.
all stuff like that, which is great. So I mean, if they could also utilize something like this, I think I've heard some more specific examples I heard of that I thought were really interesting were a diamond company putting in their code that they will no longer work with mining companies, I guess, that exploit their workers or something like that. And because it's in the code, it's just automatic. You don't have to.
You have so supply chain management and transparency into real time supply chain is a very common use case for blockchain technology right now. Mm-hmm. And you can use it in service of elevating workers or making sure you're not selling blood diamonds.
Right.
There's a bunch of plays in healthcare and in food in that arena as well.
Already?
Yeah. What jumps to mind? I know that my friend Christine Mosley, who I have a lot of respect for, she started a company called Full Harvest. And I know they've been hard flirting with blockchain because they're a benefit corp, they're a B Corp. And their corporate charter, the intention is to eliminate food waste, right? And so blockchain can be a really interesting way to see what's happening with food and where you can diminish waste, which is,
Do you know what they're doing?
I don't. I haven't talked. It's been too long since I talked to her, but she keeps getting these big rounds of funding and she seems to be doing great.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
So when you have friends in the startup ecosystem who are doing great, it means you stop seeing them, ironically. Because they're nose down so much of the time. But I invite people over for dinner all the time. So you're reminding me I should invite her over for dinner. Yeah.
Are you able to speak to the owner-worker dynamic that this could change?
Yeah. So for me, that's a good question. And I think the most powerful application of this, if we were to go back to Bright ID, Philip Silva's attempt to create a super rudimentary base layer of self-sovereign identity, he wants to use that to deliver UBI. So what would that mean?
UBI, Universal Basic Income.
Universal Basic Income. So you have $100. Imagine you could point, click, and send that fractionally to every breathing person on Earth. And every breathing gets 0.01 cent of that $100. Cryptocurrency and blockchain ostensibly could do that technically, right? And so it having a unique, you only get one identity online allows you. It eliminates the danger that if you have 1,000 identities, then you get 1,000 UBI. Sort of allocations. So that's one of his big aspirations, is to find decentralized way to deliver UBI. He and I are aligned on the fact that we want to find use cases for these things that raise that floor on need, right? And so there's universal basic income, which is a handout. And then there's also notions around universal basic assets. Mm-hmm. So if you're a Norwegian citizen, you have the universal basic asset of the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Norway. If you live in Alaska, you already get universal basic income because there's a dividend based on oil revenue, oil taxes. So these things actually aren't unprecedented, and they've come close to passing in the past. But now we have this powerful technological mechanism to eliminate all the bureaucracy. I'm supporting a guy who's running for president named Andrew Yang. And the keystone of his policy platform is universal basic income. He's calling it the freedom dividend, or capitalism that doesn't start at zero. And he imagines automation eliminating jobs in vast swaths in the coming decade. And in order to keep American society from collapsing, because our dignity and self-esteem is very tied up in our jobs, and that needs to change, in my opinion. To keep people from freaking out, we should give them $1,000 a month per person. You're 18 to 64 and you're breathing in America, you're a citizen. Here's your $1,000.
Is that what the proposal is? Is $12,000 per person a year?
That is correct. And actually, he gave the most and the number one criticism of how you're going to pay for this. He gave the most eloquent defense of universal basic income I have ever heard on the Sam Harris podcast. I think it's episode 130.
You know the episode number.
I can't remember really simple things, but I remember stuff like this.
And what did he say to that?
I wouldn't even deign to attempt. I'm good at, he's incredible. I mean, he's part of his policy platform is universal health care, student loan forgiveness. It's a very much a hybrid of entrepreneurship. UBI actually increases incidence of people starting businesses, right? So this gets back to your question, that dynamic between the boss and the worker.
Yeah. Well, I do want to go back to universal basic income because I was going to ask you about that. But I think what I was also wondering about with the owner-worker dynamic was the idea of making workers also owners and investors in the company just by using the tokens, right? The currencies.
Yeah. I mean, if you tokenize, as they say, REI already does that, right?
Oh, they do?
REI is a co-op. It's a cooperative.
Their workers are also owners?
Their workers are owners, tiny fractional owners.
How does that, I've always wondered, how does that work when they leave the company?
I don't know. But I assume that they get like a vesting schedule and they get a little tiny bit of the shares, and I would assume they own that in perpetuity unless they decide to sell it, right? And so they probably get a little tiny dividend. As a customer, we get dividends too. That's part of their marketing. So if I spend $1,000 at the end of a year, I get a little thing that says...
Really?
Yeah, if you're an REI member, I feel like I'm doing an ad for REI. If you're an REI member, every year you get your little dividend thing. And it's clever because it's an inducement for me to go in and spend my dividend. And of course I spend a little more. Well,
spend your dividend, but also just go to them more. It's like a really cool coupon.
I'm very loyal to brands like that because... for a lot of reasons, but one of them is, I was with the people there emotionally register to me as happy compared to most retail people working, right? And I know that's a big, broad statement. I'm sure there's people who hate working at REI, but I really feel it. I love going into any business when it's obvious people here give a shit. We did a good people retreat recently in the middle, literally the geographic center of Nevada. Every August, there's the height of the Perseid meteor showers. It's our biggest meteor showers. We sit in hot springs. We have a great chef. It's wonderful. My daughter was along for this one, and she was making these comments about our chef, Eliza Martin, and her boyfriend was there and helping, and they were working like nonstop. You know why? They had created some very sophisticated menus, and they had no electricity and no running water. And so they had these really interesting creative constraints. And so my daughter and I had this deep, I often have the most profound conversations with my 8-year-old. We had this really deep conversation about caring. And if you truly deeply don't care, right, you should walk away. And most people can't do that because they're afraid that they and the people they love will be without basic necessities. And so their whole vocational identity is built on a foundation of scarcity and fear. And I think it's time for us to get rid of that. And something like universal basic income would allow it. It would allow that sort of minimum wage worker to say, you're abusive, I'm leaving. It would allow... frankly, a woman who's economically dependent on a husband who assaults her to leave because she knows she's going to keep getting that money from the government, hopefully delivered onto her phone.
How does that work if everyone's getting the same amount of money? Does that just rise the cost of everything else? Does that cause inflation? Yes, that is a very common potential criticism of this from the conservative side, and I think there's validity to it. I also think there are countermeasures, just like we have countermeasures. And I mean, we're doing things with the American dollar right now that are unprecedented in history. We've been acting like drunk sailors. Just infinite quantitative easing, essentially, is what we've been doing. And right now there's a little bit of a showdown between number 45 and the Fed
because he doesn't want them to do the responsible thing, right? Which is to raise interest rates. And he doesn't want to do it because it would have a negative impact on election cycles. So what he's setting, in my opinion, us up for is a big, painful economic correction.
Well, on that note, because we're so much in debt, because we're spending so much. I mean, well, I guess that goes back to where would the money come from for the universal
I'm going to defer to Andrew on that, and you can go to his website, yang2020.com.
God, that could be an entire episode.
Could be. I mean, you should. I'm happy to put you in touch with his.
Oh, that'd be great.
The guy who runs his campaign, Zach. They're going to be come to dinner. They're going to be in San Francisco November 1st. They might be doing a dinner down here on November 3rd in LA. Anyway, I can connect you guys, and you can.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, because I mean, I would love to talk to some. Because you're not the only one who's brought this up. Elon Musk has said it's interesting. All of these. The heads of these disruptive technologies are saying this. And I think that's really interesting. The ones that would know the most about AI, robotics. And I'm curious to know, how is this different than other disruptive eras in the past where 90% of jobs were taken? This is a black swan.
This is a black swan. This is different. This is different in kind, and they're right. Basically, the more you know about sort of exponential technologies becoming implemented, they reach these tipping points. The less you know, the more you think, well, that's just this tiny fraction of the job market. And the more you learn, I had dinner recently with two friends in Paris. She's an architect and he's a lawyer. And they said, our jobs are safe. I said, let's look at some websites that do what you do. And so we did. I was like, these are kind of crappy right now. And you could argue you might be able to do a slightly better job. They're doing it at a tiny fraction of the cost. And I saw them, like, it started to dawn on them that lawyers and architects could become irrelevant in 90% of these use cases. And so funny. The conversation switched to, well, how does the French government protect us from this? How does the French government enshrine our jobs and protect our jobs? and which is very different, for instance, from Sweden, where the labor minister's gone on record. She said, we don't protect jobs. We embrace new technology. We do protect people. You do not have to fall into a panic about basic necessities and healthcare just because your job is probably gone forever. I think all these people, Yuval Noah Harari's talked about this in Homo Deus. I mean, all these people who see this all clearly realize there's going to be a large and growing percentage of the population who's effectively going to become unemployable. And so we need to look at alternate sources of dignity and human fulfillment and how we care for each other that don't necessarily look like vocation. And when we look around, we see actually there are a ton that are simply uncompensated right now, right? Taking care of kids, taking care of the elderly, for instance. These are usually uncompensated, and they're fulfilling and exhausting. So, yeah. Yeah,
because, I mean, I would love to be in touch with you, Ryan, because there's so much here that I want to talk about. Yeah. Well, I mean, let's jump even more into with your altruistic economies concept, because it sounds like that's really what you're passionate about and where you think the game change could be. That not a lot of people in this space are saying. I think a lot of people in this space, they're thinking very financial, they're thinking very business-minded, which is totally fine, but I think you kind of go the extra mile.
Yeah, so here's how when I look around, I see most of the business altruists saying, how do we make this giant raging river more humane? How do we make it better? Let's fix or manipulate, or we'll put a little dike there and a dam there, and we'll create a little stream here. But they're all talking about working within the current incentive system in some way. And for me, I like to think about tools that allow us to invent tools. I like to think, how far towards the root cause can I go? Because the closer I get to the root cause, the more exponential the impact of a successful experiment there. So for me, I want to go to the top of the mountain. Okay, so this is the giant monoculture of capitalism and the shareholder economy. I would imagine this new foundation as, in this metaphor, we're going to tap wells up here. And each of them will be an entirely new stream with its own set of incentives rolling down this mountain. different and separate from capitalism. In some ways, strangely enough, similar to previous economic systems that have existed. Because I'm pro-commerce in all of this. I love the entrepreneurial impulse. I just, this particular, the rules of this form of commerce are going to kill us.
Well, I was wondering, how is this different than capitalism? Because to my knowledge, now there's different ways people can take advantage of capitalism,
Sure.
but capitalism is the idea of free market, right?
Sure.
Wouldn't this just kind of be capitalism 2.0?
I mean, you could argue about semantics, and I definitely have friends who use that. And maybe we would in the end. Maybe we would just say, okay, this includes profit motive. I can't imagine an incentive system with no profit motive. I'm not a fan of, Soviet communism. But I can't imagine incentive systems that involve profit motive, but also are so different in the what defines winning and losing that it would look pretty unrecognizable. I could imagine that.
Yeah.
And that's why I need those people with deep expertise to kind of join this foundation and be part of the founding team. And I have all these people in mind, like, Nick Hanauer, if you're out there, I'd really like to talk.
It sounds like you're saying there needs to be a fundamental shift in how we think as a society.
Yes.
So that we can then utilize this technology to make that happen, unlike we've not been able to make it happen
to address
before.
those 3 pain points. So all of this, so I've had a bunch of false starts in a book, and I'm going to isolate myself for a month and see how far along I can get. But this will all be in the book, and they're all really, I would give to this team with this really deep expertise. I'd say, here are the 3 things to me, and they may add to it, that are fatal flaws and unsustainable in the incentive system that has taken over the world. How do we invent a different incentive system that ameliorates or reverses this damage? And then we would come up with a lot of experiments. It's not one size fits all. Some of these economies would be culturally appropriate here and not there.
Right.
It's really about a trial and error, human-centered design approach to deploying these little incentive systems in very limited ways. And here's what I think would happen, going back to that metaphor of tapping wells to the top of the mountain. Most of them come up dry. We would have a high failure rate, and hopefully iterate and learn from each of those failures.
Sounds like the startup world.
Right. Well, This is where I've been pickled in this stuff at this point. And then a small percentage would demonstrate limited use case. They would become self-sustaining within specific bounds. And what I'm hoping is some of them might become larger rivers that solve for what I perceive as one of the biggest pain points on Earth. And if you read that piece I wrote, Deeply Connected, that was one failed book attempt. And in that, I'm imagining imagine this woman, she's 22, she just graduated top of her class at Harvard. She's industrious, she's brilliant, she's ambitious, and, she's also young. And so she still has a big, open, compassionate heart and wants to do good in the world. This is what her vocational choices look like. Go to a nonprofit, right? If you want to understand what's wrong with how we think of nonprofits, watch Dan Pelota's TED Talk on how we've messed up charity.
I'm actually really interested in that. Are you able to speak to that at all? I'll let you finish this point because I am interested in that.
So, basically our legal system and everything we do is, I made lots of money, now I feel icky, I'm going to give it to the nice people. It's like buying indulgences, and it doesn't make for systemic change. And he suggests, better than I can, some other ways to think about those altruistic intentions. But going back to this woman, she's 22. She's like, okay, so I can earn starting salary of 30 grand at this nonprofit and feel incredibly good and in integrity and in alignment with my values that I am delivering something of deep use to people who desperately need it every day. But my impact's going to be tiny. Or I can go get a job, McKinsey, Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, all these big companies, and I can get a starting 6-figure salary, and I can get super wealthy and then become a very powerful philanthropist, and I will have an exponentially larger impact on that cause if I just defer my philanthropy. And so the vast majority of people who have all of those, who are exceptional human beings, choose this route, right? And they defer that. And so when you get to start playing with incentive systems, let's say that you're a corporate lawyer and you're going to walk the crucible in your first few years at the firm, trying to make partner, but you're going to make hundreds of thousands of bucks a year, right? So you're killing yourself. For clients, I meet very few corporate attorneys who are deeply in touch in their work with what intrinsically motivates them, right? Their punishment is doing things they don't care that much about, and the reward is big money, right? So let's say this is 400 grand, or she could be earning 40 grand here. What if you could go to her and say, what if you could earn 200 grand and live in alignment with your values every day, straight out of college? What would that be like, right? Why can't we invent an incentive system that allows for that? And that would be my ultimate hope for this foundation, is that one of these incentive systems, we hit on the ability to fully align those things, so the most influential people joining the workforce, the people who will transform the future, are people who are able to live those values every day from the word go. They don't have to defer it. Because the history of the world, there's an archetype. King Ashoka, 3rd century BC in India, all the way up to Bill Gates. And that archetype is conquer, get exponentially rich and powerful, and then turn and become... We wouldn't have Buddhism without King Ashoka. But early on, man, he was not so cool. Lots of raping and pillaging and war. And then then he felt secure in his power.
Who is this? This is the...
If you look on one of the rupee notes in India, you'll see a column with lions on it. That's called an Ashokan column. This was an Indian king from I think the 3rd century BC. And so he's a major sort of ancient cultural hero in India. And when he became king, he made Buddhism the official state religion. Buddhism was one of...
So he's responsible for that.
That's why we have it. So, I mean, Buddhism was one of dozens of documented religions or philosophies in India at that time. Jainism was another one. Mahavira and the Buddha were contemporaries. They lived at the same time. But there were all kinds of them. Most of them disappeared. And eventually Buddhism actually died out in India, essentially, and thrived in other parts of Asia. But yeah, so I'd like to break that pattern, right? You don't have to conquer no matter what it takes, and work yourself into the ground and forego community and friendship and all these other things. You can have that your whole life and do good and not worry about sort of the material circumstances of your life.
Mm-hmm. So let's jump back into the nonprofit thing. I wasn't expecting us to go there, but I've actually am, because
it's funny because you keep asking me to defend these people who I like really admire, who are better than me.
Well, maybe okay. I'll just plant seeds then for more people to come on.
Yeah, you should definitely
for more
go
episodes.
Chase Dan Pelota. I have a lot of respect for that guy.
No, yeah, okay, that'll be great. Well, do you know a lot of people or organizations or any case studies around the world that have been trying to do really altruistic efforts in the blockchain space that have tried this out?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example of a very practical... So I'm an advisor to a company called RootProject. Founder Nick was also a founding partner in the bureau, and he's a friend. And I've been working with Gina and Nick to get real clarity on what they were doing. And it's so clear now. So you had all these blockchain startups, and it was like easy money's just flying into the coffers. Mm-hmm. And they're promising the moon and the stars, and and almost none of them are delivering. And I think you need to go back to real startup business fundamentals, right? He's got an owie, and we're going to address that in a way that we think is innovative and compelling, right? Just address the pain point. So what's the pain point? So for RootProject, the pain point is there's friction and a lot of struggle in nonprofits crowdfunding and raising money for campaigns. Mm-hmm. So
that's huge. I have family members who have worked in nonprofits for years, and this is
that's the pain point, right? That's the pain point. So you're the CEO of a nonprofit, and you would never say this in public, but we have a couple glasses of wine over dinner, and you're like, I spent all my time begging for money. Yeah, I hate it. I got in this to build schools for girls in Afghanistan, and I'm spending all my time hanging out with rich people hoping they'll give me money, or foundations or whatever. And they would all wish that the majority of they and their staff's time was focused on the intrinsically fulfilling experience of benefiting and educating these girls in Afghanistan. So what RootProject's trying to do is create an indelible ledger that is married to a reputation economy and a cryptocurrency. I'm sorry, that's a lot. Here's what it looks like. Again, I'll use an analogy. I'm an Airbnb host. I have never hosted a single person in my home. It's hard to get that first guest and start getting people recommending me because like maybe my house is filthy or maybe I'm psycho or right. Like I'm unproven. By the time I've had 50 guests, all the opportunity is inbound, right? I've been thoroughly vetted in this reputation economy context and things on autopilot. And I'm making this kind of mostly passive income. So there's an analogous opportunity there for nonprofits. If you use the platform, use the RootProject platform the first time, if I'm really going to be honest, I think it'll probably be more of a pain in the ass than it would have been to go directly to funders. But if you're willing to run it through the platform, right, you're starting to build a reputation. So now your donor class has seen what happened with every penny that they ran through this indelible ledger to build these first 3 schools. And you have 3 up and operating, you have photographic evidence and all this other stuff, 3 up and operating schools for girls in Afghanistan. Now you go back to build a 4th school. The ambition, and it's gonna be a hard thing to deliver for RootProject, is you as the CEO or whatever, or the leader, the executive director of that, point, click, $1 million. Why? Because you're a proven entity. And you have a reputation on the system, and the thing is in an indelible ledger in a decentralized way. It's unhackable, it's unfalsifiable. Does that make sense?
Kind of. I'm trying to think. Would it be? Can you compare this to like, say, a more advanced like Yelp page, kind of? I'm trying to think. I'm trying to.
Yeah, you have a lot more real data, right? I mean. A big concern among...
But it's real.
Real,
It's not fake data.
It's real, verified. It's independently, indelibly, there it is. Each time you gave 100 grand here and we built a little tiny school. We managed to raise 300 grand here, bigger school, 500 grand here, bigger school. And it's not just like, here are photos of everything. Here is literally what happened with all the money along the way.
I see. So there's a transparency to it.
It's a fully transparent,
that there isn't really
ledger
right now.
That there isn't really right now. That's what's different. And even if you were delivering this on a centralized database, it would still be, I think, a pretty powerful value proposition to nonprofits. I think this whole system, this indelible ledger system, is still nascent for RootProject. So there's going to be a lot of like clunkiness, like every startup at the beginning. But on the plus side for the nonprofit, they're going to get tons of super hands-on support because the thing's new. And stuff might go wrong and be, oh, well, we learned from that. Now we have to include that information, or actually this information is really sensitive. So actually we should hide it and it should only be accessible to this person. You can do all those.
Yeah, it's kind of like any app. You find out what works, what doesn't work, what's glitchy. But
here's the difference with RootProject, and I think it's a for-profit company. The thing that's different is a real pain point for real people who actually don't need to understand anything about blockchain to benefit from this. The world needs more companies and nonprofits using distributed ledger tech like that. And that's where I think we'll see the next upswing in the use of this. It'll be like it'll be so intuitive and useful. My mom will be like, oh, this is great. Like, oh, look, I'm getting passive income because all the hospitals want my medical data.
She can't text me, but she knows how to use this interface.
Yeah, and it's automatically, going through yeah, exactly.
Yeah, amazing. So that's what you're doing now with the RootProject.
So that's RootProject. I mean, there's a bunch of projects I'm involved with. As I said, I was part of the Bureau, and most of the energy there at the Bureau right now is focused on getting their protocol off the ground. Our protocol off the ground. The promise of all of this has not been delivered at scale. So like I said right at the beginning of our interview, Ethereum was trying to get there. They're still not there.
What were they trying to do exactly?
In other words, an enterprise-ready blockchain protocol, a base layer protocol that people could build things on top of, that could handle the volume of data, the transactions per second, and the volume of data storage and everything that huge organizations or governments need, but doing it in a way that's cryptographically superior. It's much more secure and offers other advantages over traditional centralized databases.
And why haven't past platforms been able to do that? Is it because, I mean, and this is
many reasons.
This is me just being ignorant, but wouldn't it just be a matter of more people jumping onto the platform to then get that computational power involved?
The platforms crash. The platform's so far, you have a consensus algorithm. So the first one was proof of work, right? That each computer doing a little math problem gets a little mined currency, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is that the blockchain is accretive. All the information is stored on the blockchain. So when it was brand new, you could run it on a laptop or on a cell phone even. Well, no, you couldn't. But as it grew, it's requiring bigger and bigger computers. So it's growing so big that it's super slow and clunky. So proof of work is not long-term viable, in my opinion.
What is proof of work for our viewers who don't know?
That's the consensus algorithm behind the original Bitcoin. Yeah, and I'm not a technical guy, and we could go down a rabbit hole here, and you discover the limits of my knowledge. But there are other consensus algorithms out there right now, and they're all trying distributed proof of stake. At Dispatch, it's distributed asynchronous proof of stake, which I thought was actually a very brilliant innovation by the CTO, Zane Witherspoon. In that one, for instance, the blockchain grows linearly. But because a lot of information is accessed through keys off-chain, the information it manages can grow exponentially without the system crashing. And that's really, in that case, Dispatch's attempt to solve for this problem. I think someone will. I mean, Stellar is supposed to be working really well now, but primarily for financial transactions. Hyperledger has really gained a lot of market share. Consensus was the attempt to really push the Ethereum protocol out there and make it useful at huge scale. Yeah, there's a bunch, and I learn about new stuff every day.
Yeah. There are things to learn, new things to learn every day.
Yeah, I burn out on it a little bit in the sense that, like, it's not what gets me jazzed. Like a deep technical understanding of the newest attempt. The objective gets me more jazzed, and the why gets me most excited of all. So, I really want to see these things deployed at scale in ways that benefit most of humanity, not a tiny elite. But we need people from that elite class to very magnanimously support that kind of infrastructure, an infrastructure that distributes the benefits very widely. And they're out there. I mean, that's why I called out Nick Hanauer. He's very on the record about that. Richard Branson is too. I mean, there's a handful of other entrepreneurs who are like that. I
know we talked about this we touched on this a little bit beforehand, but how do you think we go about getting these, higher ups to think that way? Because I mean, I think you're right in that our system right now, it's very profit driven. It's very,
winners
self-driven.
Take all.
Yeah. But how does that change? How does that mentality change?
So you saw me with the book out here before we came in for the interview. Anand Dardas, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. I met him once at a dinner for his wife's book launch, Priya Parker's book launch. He just wrote a book called Winners Take All, and the subtitle is The Elite Charade of Changing the World. And I think we're at a time where we need people of his integrity and willingness to speak truth to power. We need a lot more like him right now. He's completely right in a lot of his diagnoses. In how he suggests ameliorating some of the problems that we find, he's kind of, I would say, kind of retrogressive. He wants to reinvigorate democracy and civil society and self-sacrifice, and I think we should. I think he's right. I just think that we should take many approaches all simultaneously. And so in his case, he's pointing out the fact that the way that, impact investing funds and benefit corporations, all these attempts to create these win-win scenarios are allowed to have limited effect as long as they don't truly threaten the most wealthy and powerful and the systems that continue to make them wealthy and powerful. If you go to the depth of systemic change, you become a threat to your donor class. And that's an inherent conflict of interest there.
Is this what you were talking about in the Facebook example? I think you were saying that global capitalism right now disincentivizes Facebook from being open with their
the values. So
is that what you were?
Yeah. So here's another. I mean, if there's going to be another flaw in capitalism, we know it. It's this attempt to pretend as a large company, as a Goliath, that you are Switzerland. You're neutral. And it's laughable. I mean, it truly is laughable. It's a little wink, wink, nod, nod. If you want to know Facebook's ethics and values that they're expressing, they're implicit in all the things they do.
In their behavior.
In their behaviors. Look at their behaviors, extrapolate values, and you can see the values of Facebook. In my ideal future, you would go to a geographically non-specific online economy, and it would say right up there, we stand for these values at the top.
You think that would be good for all businesses?
Hear me out.
Okay.
So these are the values we believe in, right? And here's how we implement them structurally in this incentive system. If you see hypocrisy here, tell us. Point it out. We're just going to be forthright and transparent about the ethics that are driving this particular incentive system. If this resonates with you, you can participate. And if it doesn't, you don't have to. And yes, I think that the ultimate expression of all this would be I get to die in a world of diverse economies all over the world that are totally interoperable and are opt-in and are explicit about the values that they stand for. Mm-hmm. And that there's integrity, right? There's correlation between speech and action. We get into trouble when we get out of that.
But is it a good thing, though, that companies, specifically one like Facebook that has so much power and control over how people get their information, isn't it good that they're incentivized to maybe take a step back? So
the incentive there, and maybe this is a good incentive we want to retain from capitalism. Maybe it's not. I don't know. The incentive there is don't diminish your potential user pool, right? That is what it looks like to me.
Because if they were to come straight out and just say, "I'm literally,"
they might
this
be
is
smaller.
Not...
They might limit the size. They might limit their growth. But the trade-off was they would be in integrity, right? Like we need to wrap our heads around. It's probably not good that we have companies as powerful as Google and Facebook. We can actually bake into the incentive layer delimiting factors that might keep them from becoming so powerful that they swing the elections of currently the most powerful country on earth, right? Like should a private company have even the capability to so heavily influence American elections?
But couldn't they technically, in this theory of being more open with their ethics or how they feel, couldn't they then purposefully swing things one way that they would want to if they're being more public?
So this is where we have to hope, right? So in that, there's no longer at least the duplicity, in my opinion. And we have to hope in the goodwill and good faith of most people, which I do. I mean, one of the great learnings of being an Airbnb host is, oh, wow, like most people are really great. And like 1 in 20 is kind of a nightmare. You know, but
it's funny.
It's probably what
that is true. I mean, wasn't that the concern? I think a lot of investors talk about how they passed on Airbnb at first. Yeah. Because they're like, this is a disastrous idea.
People are going to come in and rob and rape and kill and
your house is going to get
They're just going to burn your house down.
Right.
Obviously.
Right. Yeah. Same with Uber. Driving people around your own car, it's a disaster.
But think about all the opportunities for trust-inducing business models. You know, if you have an indelible ledger, right, and you have a reputation that you want to protect, and that is somehow entirely unique to you and non-reproducible, this is already how it works in the physical world. Bill Cosby will have a hard time doing a comedy special. But online, you can create a new profile, use someone else's photo, and voila, back in business. Right? Imagine you bring some of that accountability into the online world.
Well, and I imagine that if you get distributed ledger technology involved, that actually takes away the need to trust people. Because right now, I get in an Uber car or an Airbnb, let's say, and I trust that it's a
safe.
The owner's not sitting in there like being crazy, whatever,
waving a gun.
Or you trust that the people renting your space aren't gonna trash the place and then just leave or steal all your stuff,
right?
Because you could have something
you have recourse
in there that says if X, Y, Z, whatever happens, automatically
you have recourse.
You're getting fined or whatever it is.
Yeah, or you get an insurance claim or something like that. Yeah, so some people call these systems trustless. For me, that's a misnomer. I really think of them as you create a layer of software that is an inducement to trust and cooperation. But, again, parable of the hammer, man. Like, there's so many ways to abuse this. There's so many ways that DLTs and cryptocurrency can be used to exacerbate and accelerate wealth polarization. Right. It can, when Instagram sold to Facebook, what was it, like 12 employees for $50 billion or some crazy shit like that. Right. It's going faster and faster with fewer and fewer people reaping larger and larger rewards. Jared Lanier in Berkeley talks a lot about this. And he's right. And so what we need to do is these exponential powerful tools, we need to curb that tide and stop accelerating these, I think immoral trends. Like I just don't think there's any way around. They're not amoral, they're immoral. There's one of Anand's points in Winners Take All, which I think he's right about, is the people with the most need to start speaking the language of sacrifice. Economies are not zero-sum games, but the people at the top sacrificing more allows enormous alleviation of suffering and manifesting of human potential. Like that's the direction. That's the Star Trek future rather than the Mad Max future. That's the future I want for my daughter. My daughter, it's like, let's work really hard to build Star Trek, and if it fails, I want her to be ready for Mad Max. I want her to be able to find the clean water, because it's not alarmist anymore. That new UN report is positively dire. Everybody's talking about not how do we curtail climate change, but how do we adapt to a really inhospitable planet.
I haven't read that.
It's not happy reading, but it's real science. It's real science.
Yeah.
It's empirical. It's not make-believe.
So what are some other companies that you're involved in or excited about right now?
Well, so kind of two categories. I'm a kind of a community junkie, so I go to a lot of different communities. I mentioned I run Good People, which is all built around meaningful conversations. But I love Renaissance Weekend. I'll be going there for New Year's Eve in Charleston.
What is that?
They've been around since 1981. It's Phil and Linda Later. Like so many of these, it started as a dinner party. And it's become this big community. Now my friend Ali is the executive director. And they do 4 or 5 per year all over the country. And most of them are 250, 300 people. And they move around to different cities or rural environments, spectacular ones. I was just in Beaver Creek, and I've been to Banff and Jackson Hole. The New Year's Eve one is the biggest, though. It's about 1,000 to 1,500 people, and it really takes over Charleston. And it's like black tie dancing and until 2 a.m. on New Year's Eve. So I love that community, and I love it because it's eager learning, incredibly accomplished people. They have a lot of rituals that really flatten it. It's radically participatory. If you attend, you have to present. And I've always just walked away with incredible friends and we, 1 + 1 = 3 kind of relationships. I just got back from OC Impact. I told the co-founders, who are husband and wife, this morning that it was immediately one of my favorite communities in the world, and it's all about positive social impact, whether it's through nonprofits or for-profits or NGOs or governments.
Oh, that's right up your alley.
I met so many brilliant, sincere, caring human beings there. And so I'm really excited. I made a few proposals to them, and we're having a few conversations about how we can support each other.
Nice.
What else? I'm helping Nick. So Nick is the CEO and founder of RootProject. So it has that very altruistic set of intentions, but he's also a political economist. He did his PhD at Wisconsin. And so he's probably, RootProject is not going to probably throw off a ton of cash. So he's got a second company, Judge Research, which is just like market analytics on cryptocurrencies, which you kind of don't have thorough, detailed, and verifiable market insights on cryptocurrencies. So I'm helping them with some of the branding there, and we'll be doing some events there. My friend Mark Harrison, who I've known for many years. He was a diplomat. He's done all kinds of NGO projects. The dude is, for me, the quintessential, like, paradigmatic example of the business altruist. He speaks 6 languages, like, natively.
Whoa.
He's a great listener, much better than me. He's a reminder to listen better. He's deeply caring and compassionate and savvy. And he's gone through periods of serious disillusionment in the last 5 or 10 years. So I was with him and his wife, Jackie. She's the CEO of a company called Boat Setter, which is basically Airbnb for boats. And I was hanging out with them, and she's doing great. That company's really doing well. They bought up a bunch of their competition. And so I was with them in Fort Lauderdale, and I was like, hey, I'm going next weekend to Cancun to OC Impact. And he was like, can I come? And like managed to get him in there. And he lit up. And so by the end of it, he offered to make me a partner at his company.
Oh, wow.
Which is called AH Global. Which is
How many companies are you involved with?
Right now. So AH Global is like an influencer marketing thing. Basically, people want you to have an influencer marketing without any big outlay of cash. Gosh, how many am I involved with right now? So there's still Good People Dinners, which I've had for 6 years, and I started that. There's Judge Research, there's RootProject, there's AH Global. Gosh, I'm probably forgetting something.
You really are what was the word? Dilettante?
Yeah, dilettante.
Yeah.
And then the other one is basically a working Google document right now that I drafted. My friend Ramin Sarabi drafted it out of a conversation. He's also part of the whole altruistic startup ecosystem in San Francisco. And so where I'd like to be 6 months from now is basically I'm going to vanish for a month. I have a friend who offered me his place on the backside of the Sierras near a hot spring. No guests, no booze, no social media.
You're saying 1 day a week. You're not
No speaking talking. 1 day a week. I can read and exercise as much as I want. And my deliverable at the end of a month is a minimum of 60,000 words, which is a book on incentive system design, essentially. And that'll be the foundation for this new foundation, which I hope will be able not just to diagram and invent incentive systems, but actually deploy them through software in partnership with NGOs. So 6 months from now, where I'd like to be is basically Good People Dinners, maybe by then has an executive director and a physical building, probably in the Bay Area. And I'm looking for a business partner there. I may have found someone. And then this foundation is up and running. And we get an incredible advisory board. Kate Rayworth would be my #1 at the top of the list. I hope she will consider.
She's the green donut?
She's the donut economics, green donut economist. And then basically I want to do those 2 things. So like this is the conversation and this is the thing we do. And then I'm very old and the world is
and tired
and the world is less lonely and more interesting, not just for people who are wealthy, but for everyone. And people have a new diversity of economies that they can choose to participate in if they feel like it.
Oh, I think that's a perfect place to end things. Well, good luck with all of these endeavors that are happening very quickly. And thank you so much for coming on and sharing sharing your thoughts on all of this.
We talked about a lot, didn't
we did talk about a lot. That's like we were just saying, welcome to Exploring Minds.
Yeah.
We talk a lot.
Thank you for inviting me on, Michelle. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching the episode. If you're interested in contributing to the conversation and supporting the show, there's 2 easy things you can do. 1, click subscribe, and 2, visit our Patreon page where you get exclusive access to the Exploring Minds community.